So, last week's video, the one on the W's, that was kind of a last minute addition. I kind of came up with the idea. It's like, oh, I like that. Okay, I want to give this Brave New World one. I hit my mic. I want to give this Brave New World one just a little bit more time. So this would be a good filler. I'm pretty happy that I actually decided to do that. I feel it was a good say. I could see the reflection of the shadow of my glasses behind me. Anyways, as I said in that video, I was raised evangelical and, well, I was pretty hardcore. I mean, I didn't bomb abortion clinics or anything, but yeah, I was pretty hateful. Now, one might be thinking, okay, so how did you change that? I read Brave New World. No, seriously, that's it. Because ultimately, Brave New World, the society is based a lot on social conditioning, and ultimately, I felt like when I read the book, I'm like, whoa, are my thoughts actually that of my own, or are they thoughts that have been instilled by my parents and the culture that I grew up in? A great example that I used for this is when I was first going to church. You know, in Sunday school, we heard the story of Noah, and I'm like, oh hey, I saw something on Animaniacs about this guy. There's a segment about Noah. Okay, so we're just acknowledging this as fact. Okay, cool. So even if that's not what the Animaniacs meant to do, it's just it's just society. Intentional conditioning or not, it is there. And so this book got me thinking, wow. So, let's try to break free of those chains there. Oh, and, just because I feel like showing it, I guess, since this is a dystopia episode, or an episode on some dystopian fiction, how was that coming through? Whoa! My chair kind of tipped. Wearing a BioShock shirt. So this episode is based on Brave New World. So the beginning of this book is to get us acclimated to this world. A group of students are touring the Central London Hatching and Conditioning Center, and in the world state, children are not born, they are decanted from bottles and conditioned to their caste level through Pavlovian conditioning and hypnopathic messaging. The levels of the caste from top to bottom are alphas, betas, gammas. Wait, no. Is it gammas? Yeah, okay. Yeah, gammas, deltas, and epsilons. I couldn't remember my Greek alphabet, I guess. For some reason, I couldn't remember if gamma was before or after delta. The alphas generally are in positions of power, and the betas are skilled workers. Gammas are generally in the service industry, or in jobs that take a little less skill. Deltas would be factory workers. And epsilons generally do jobs that are generally unpleasant. Gammas, deltas, and epsilons are formed using the Volkanovsky process, which is a process where they take one fertilized egg and cause it to multiply into several dozen, so that they have several dozen identical clones. The average group size is about 6 dozen. In addition to the Volkanovsky process, the lower castes also have alcohol introduced to their bottles so as to stimulate their mental growth. And each class is conditioned to be happy with their lot in life. And if they so happen to not be, there's always Soma. Soma is a narcotic that, well, I can't really explain it. It creates a euphoric feeling, and I've always kind of thought of it as being slightly hallucinogenic. Not that it really makes the user see things or, trip balls or anything like that, but the users are known to go on Soma holidays, if too much is consumed. And that happens to take them out of the present, so to say. Now, the world state conditions its citizens to no longer have a strong sense of individuality. They do this by conditioning the masses to consume absurd recreational activities. Escalator squash comes to mind. prohibiting activities one can do by themselves, such as reading for entertainment. Reading still exists, but it's more for the purpose of jobs, but also through sex. Though humans are no longer viviparous, they are even more sexual creatures. At a young age, they start having erotic play on the playgrounds, and not having multiple partners is seen as antisocial. Not only is promiscuity preached, but the citizens have to report in for mandatory orgies. And speaking of preach, that was a terrible segue. Anyways, religion has been done away with, but they do seem to worship Henry Ford. They refer to him as R. Ford, and when mentioned, the citizens make a T on their chests, or stomachs, I guess, somewhere on their torso, and the year is referred to as AF, or after Ford. It's a little hard to say when exactly 0 AF would be. I've seen some speculations say it was when the first Model T was created, and some, of course, is after Ford, because, that's what it is, but Henry Ford was actually still alive at this point. Now, the reason they seem to worship him is, well, the assembly line is very important to their job, especially especially when it comes to the production of people. We are soon then introduced to our two main-ish characters, Bernard Marx and Lenina Crown. Bernard is an Alpha Plus who has trouble fitting in. Unlike most of this world, Bernard has an identity of self. He is not overly interested in being part of society, dislikes society's views on sex, and has a strong dislike of Soma, as he does not simply want to will away the inconvenience. And people have noticed his peculiarities. There's a rumor going around that alcohol was introduced in his bottle before he was decanted, causing his odd qualities and short stature. Bernard's job is as the hypnopathic specialist in the conditioning center, and Lenina she's in charge of immunization. Well, okay, she's not in charge of it, but she immunizes the kids. Despite his peculiarities, Bernard is viewed as quite competent at his job. His best friend is Helmholtz Watson, who is a lecturer at a university, who is also frustrated with life under the world state, as he wants to use his words to create. Despite the camaraderie, they feel, at least to me, to not really like each other much. Now, Lenina, we are never explicitly told her caste. I always assumed that she was an alpha, but I decided to Google it, and a lot of people seem to think that she is a beta. Again, there's just no evidence one way or the other, really. Actually, one of the reasons I thought she was a alpha is later, when she's introduced to a character, she's asked to basically put herself into somebody else's shoes who happens to be a beta. And although I think it's probably because her situation is so terrible, and Lenina is freaked out by the situation. I also like to believe that she's freaked out because she was asked to be put in the shoes of a beta. But Lenina is mentioned as wearing green several times in the book, but that is actually the color of gammas. But she does repeat a hypnopathic message several times during the book, saying, "I am sure glad I am not a gamma." We are introduced to her talking to her friend Fanny at work. She confides in Fanny that she is still having Henry Foster. Fanny chides Lenina for her monogamy. But we find out that Lenina is interested in Bernard, and is planning to go to a savage reservation with Bernard, much to Fanny's displeasure. The savage reservations are areas of land that the world state has found to not have significant value, and as such, they allow the people who live there to live free. Just let them live as they see fit. And I've kind of got to wonder if the Vatican was allowed to be its own reservation. I mean, Vatican City doesn't really have connections to water. It doesn't really have any natural resources. So I think that'd be kind of neat. It was probably rolled in with Rome, though. When Bernard asks the hatchery director for permission to go to the reservation, the director reminisces out loud about when he visited the reservation and lost the woman that he was having at the time. When Bernard calls his attention back, the director threatens to send Bernard to Iceland if he does not stop being so unorthodox. But this actually emboldens Bernard. And I kind of like to imagine that he walks out of the office strutting down the hall, kind of like John Travolta struts on the street at the beginning of Saturday Night Fever, well, you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. But anyways, everything's all set, and Bernard and Lenina travel to New Mexico to visit the reservation, which is a Native American village. But before they are choppered into the reservation, Bernard has realized that he left a tap on at home and asks Helmholtz to shut it off. But when he calls Helmholtz informs him that there's talks that he is actually going to be replaced. And seeing that Iceland was not just a threat, Bernard becomes terrified. The village confuses Lenina and Bernard. On top of watching a vibrant ceremony ending with violence, the two, mostly Lenina, become perplexed as to why the people are aged and why they smell. But horrors upon horrors, Lenina left her soma in the hotel room. To be honest, Lenina doesn't seem to have a lot of character. She's just kind of there almost to react to things and to be confused by differences. In other words, she's basic AF. But soon after the ceremony, they meet John, the proverbial black sheep of the village. Unlike everyone else, John's parents were not from the village, but were actually from the world state. John's mother, Linda, got lost while she was visiting the reservation with a former lover. John's mother, Linda, got lost while on holiday with her then lover, Thomas, whom she had procreated with. Now, in the world state, about 70% of the women are sterile, but some are left not. Basically, they do need some reproductive organs and eggs and whatnot. The women who are fertile do not birth children. They are on birth control, and in worst case scenario, there's abortion clinics. John is humiliated not only because he is an outsider, but also because his mother is hated for sleeping around with all the men, as, she was conditioned to do. Linda did teach John to read, and he fell in love with Shakespeare after Pope, a former lover of his mother, gives him the complete works. So, in preparation for this video, I actually read this book for my third time. And I've got to say, I don't remember disliking Bernard as much as I do. And if I did dislike him, I just forgot about it, but, whatever. Bernard is a piece of crap. He brings Linda and John back to civilization, not for either of their benefit, but so that when the director of Hatchery decides to, holds his meeting, say, hey, Bernard, Iceland, he could be like, hey, look at this. I've got some people to show you. And the director is humiliated out of a job, saving Bernard's. John and Linda did agree to go back, but Bernard's only interest in bringing them was to save his own skin. John soon becomes a sensation, and due to having brought John back, Bernard feels the effects of fame. No longer are there whispers of alcohol being in his decanter, and now he feels like a part of society. He is sexually more confident, and in his ego, even unfriends Helmholtz. In addition, he studies John and reports his findings to Mustafa Mon, one of 10 world directors. And he kind of acts like John's agent. One night, Bernard throws a party involving some important people, but to his horror, John will not come out of his room. Having let down the socialites, Bernard is ashamed, and before they are out of his apartment, he begins hearing whispers again about alcohol in a decanter. At his low, Bernard refriends Helmholtz, who has gotten into a bit of trouble for creating and reading out some rhymes to a class he was lecturing. And it is at this time that Helmholtz also befriends John, and they discuss Shakespeare. Helmholtz is thrilled to hear the words of the bard, and is hitting it off quite well with John. So much so that Bernard becomes jealous. However, Helmholtz kind of insults John when he laughs at the prospect of Romeo and Juliet. Since they've been back from the reservation, Lenina has pretty much been out of the picture. And when she comes back, she is thirsty AF for John. And John is quite infatuated with her too. But the two of them have two completely different ideas. Lenina just wants some wham bam thank you man. And John is looking for intimacy. And not just physical intimacy. And let me say, this is a time when a female character has some toxic masculinity traits. She believes that she is owed John, so she undresses in front of John, trying to seduce him, and forces herself on him. In response, John gets angry and threatens violence against Lenina. She is saved when John receives a call informing him that his mother, Linda, is almost dead. When he arrives, Linda is deep in a Soma holiday, and she mistakes John for her former lover, Pope. Only after John gets angry and violently shakes his mother does she recognize him, but soon thereafter dies. A distraught John grieves out loud, but a nurse chides him for interfering with the death conditioning of a Bokanovsky group. John then crashes a distribution of Soma rations, throwing the Soma out a window and causing riots. Helmholtz and Bernard soon show up to try to stop John, but instead get mixed in with the riot. Or at least Helmholtz does. Bernard stands idly by, debating what to do. The police soon come in, quelling the panic with a gas cloud of Soma. The three of them are then brought into Mustafa Mond, where Helmholtz and Bernard are informed that they will be sent to an island for isolation. Bernard, realizing what is happening, begins to panic, and tries to save himself by throwing Helmholtz and John under the bus, saying that he had nothing to do with anything. Bernard is then escorted by 3 guards to be sedated, and Mustafa tells Helmholtz that he's actually a little bit jealous of the two, as the unorthodox are far more interesting company. It actually turns out that Mustafa Mond in his youth was a scientist who became bored with the normal fields and expanded outside what was deemed suitable. After he was caught, he was given 2 options: be sent to an island or to begin training to become a world controller. After Helmholtz leaves to care for Bernard, John and Mustafa are left to discuss the state of the world. During their meeting, John quotes Othello, and to his surprise, finds that the world controller is able to answer with another quote. Being in a position of power, Mustafa is able to read all of the forbidden works. John asks if he finds value in them. Why are they forbidden? Because tragedy has no room in this world. Passion is a thing of the past, as is suffering. And having eliminated those, the populace is happy. Also, that in being old, Shakespeare has no valuable to a consumerism. I've got to disagree with that because Shakespeare's still being printed today. But whatever. And the dialogue between these 2 characters is really the thesis of the book. I do it injustice, so I won't try to go much further. Unlike Bernard and Helmholtz, John is not allowed to leave civilization. He's going to be researched further. John secludes himself as a penance for Linda's death by inhabiting a lighthouse and living off the land. And while he's working the land, he finds himself happy and singing, which simply won't do, as this is penance. Soon a group of Delta Minus workers pass by, observing John practicing self-flagellation. Did I say that right? Yeah, I think I did. Which is soon reported, causing John to be swarmed by paparazzi. One night, Lenina visits John. It's never exactly said it's Lenina, but it's implied that it is her. But anyways, one night Lenina visits John. Soon, Lenina, John, and those who came to watch him all start a Soma Field orgy. The next day, John is horrified at what he has done, and in penance and in shame, he takes his own life. Okay. So that's the book. I mean, I would seriously say, go read this book. It's a great one. But that's the rough outline of it. Now, Aldous Huxley is kind of an interesting character. One might think, all this stuff about Selma and whatnot, he must not have liked drugs. You'd be friggin' wrong. The Doors of Perception in Heaven and Hell. This is the book that the Doors got their name from. Basically, this is some essays that he wrote talking about how psychedelics are good for spiritual life. And then his last book was Island. Can't really see the title there. This is kind of the opposite of Brave New World. So yeah. Another thing about Aldous Huxley and drugs. This dude, when he realized that he was dying, he had his wife administer some acid for him. This dude died tripping. And, actually, speaking of Aldous Huxley's passing, he passed on, November 22nd? But speaking of Aldous Huxley's passing, he passed November 22nd, 1963, which, some of you may recognize that date as the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, but it was also the day that C.S. Lewis passed away. So, I don't know, just a fun fact for you. Okay. I'm done recording this part. I'm going to record the part for the 98 movie a little later.